Welcome back to the ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. If you don't know me yet, I'm Stella Roque, Director of Community Engagement at ICFJ, based out in Washington, D.C. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Corinne Podger, Director of the Digital Skills Agency from all the way in Australia, to give you an introductory masterclass to podcasting. Corinne is a former news and science journalist who spent most of her reporting career with the BBC World Service and ABC Radio Australia. Since 2013, she has worked in media development, training thousands of reporters all over the world to use smartphones and affordable technologies and software for multimedia creation. The Digital Skills Agency is a consultancy Corinne has founded, and she continues to work as a reporter covering digital news technology for a range of outlets. A reminder to the people tuning in, if you have questions during the presentation, please post them on the Zoom chat or in the comments of the Facebook live stream post below. And we will get to your questions after Corinne's presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Corinne right now. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I turn it over to you. And I'll be back after she's done with her presentation.
Thank you so much, Stella, and thanks so much to everyone who's giving up an hour or so of your time today to join this webinar. Right, and I am all the way over in Australia, although everyone else is all the way over where all you are. So it's all relative, isn't it? I'm going to share my screen and run through a slide deck. And just to mention at the start that I've just put a tweet out. I haven't pinned it, but it's the second one down. And it has a Google Doc of resources that I'll mention in this session so that you can download that and then just grab the links to some of the things that I'm going to cover in the next hour. Okay, so let's do the screen sharing thing. Here we go. Just want to make sure that the sound is working. Desktop, that's what we want. And slideshow from beginning. Okay, great. Okay, so that's me, and pre-COVID, what I was spending most of my time doing was traveling, working as a contractor in various countries. As Stella mentioned, the thing that really interests me is affordable and accessible technologies. And so that's really going to be the focus of this hour, is how can you get into podcasting relatively inexpensively? So really looking forward to sharing some ideas with you on that. So this has really been my journey. As Stella mentioned, I started out as a multimedia journalist. The first time I ever had a play in the audio space was in the 90s. I worked at an educational radio station, 2SER in Sydney. I worked for the BBC for about a decade in London, and then I relocated to Australia in 2007. What I wanted to do was add TV and social media and online to the radio work. And the best way to do that was to join a different broadcaster. And then since 2015, I've been working as a trainer. And you can see there some of the folks that I've been working with. The top photo is one from Tunisia a couple of years ago, and the bottom one was just last year, running some training for the Indian newspaper Manorama. So some of the outlets that I've been working with specifically on podcasting have been in the UK, here in Australia, and also increasingly in the non-English speaking market. And I think that's a really exciting space over the next couple of years as we see new communities coming online and perhaps a little bit less NPR and a little bit more content coming out of places in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa, and so on. Okay, so what a year, huh? So it's been a shift to online for me and also for the organisations that I work with. And one of the things that I did in June this year was co-organise a mobile journalism conference for Asia. And as part of that, we commissioned some content, audio content, to turn into podcasts from all over the world. And what that was, that as an editor, so part of my role, as well as making one of the podcasts, was also to edit everyone's content. And it came in all kinds of formats. It was stuff that people had recorded over Zoom and Skype. Someone had recorded in a radio studio, but they'd linked up with someone who was in their home office. And so it was a real mix of content. And when we get to the Q&A, it'll be interesting to just sort of have a chat about how do you standardize some of that sound. And so I put all of that together into a series of podcasts, and you can have a listen to that on the Mojo Asia channel on SoundCloud. So this is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to just grab my phone and keep half an eye on the time. We'll do an overview. I want to really dig into some of the, how do you do this? Recording equipment and software, audio editing software, and then a bit about what kind of audio you're going to need and how to make that sound great. Hosting sites, then the most important thing, a thumb-stopping idea. What are you going to come up with? And then should you make one? And some next steps. So this year, we've seen the Reuters Institute publish a paper just towards the end of last year, actually, that found that 36% of online news consumers access a podcast at least once a month, and 15% listen to a daily news podcast. And this year, we've seen a huge rise in the number of daily news podcasts. So that's definitely a genre to watch. But of course, not just news. There's current affairs, politics and sport. There's fashion, gaming, history and tech. We're also seeing a growing, as I mentioned, amount of output from non-English markets and all demographics. And I just wanted to put the word including kids because a lot of the podcast ideation sessions I've run with news outlets, no one has mentioned children. And in fact, kids love podcasts. So if you're thinking for an idea for next year, perhaps that's an area to explore because it's certainly a very hungry market and really underserved in a lot of places. So anyone can podcast. It has been a space that's been occupied by radio, both public and commercial, for nearly 2 decades. Newspapers have come on board. TV stations a bit. Here in Australia, Channel 10 is one of the TV stations that's got podcasts. We also have digital-only podcasts, so Slate magazine, and then also Slate Plus, which is interesting. What their podcast, or one of their podcasts, is available without any ads, for example, for people who subscribe to Slate. And so I think there are these sort of edgier, in terms of the revenue side of things, approaches to audio storytelling. They're also freelancers. And so lovely Isabel Roque set up the Borderline podcast, I think earlier this year, for global nomads. And that's literally a one-woman show. And then, of course, non-journalists. And so we are, if you're coming to this webinar from a journalism background, you're going into a noisy market with a lot of competition. And so just having a look, not just at what other news outlets are doing, but also what's available in the wider space as you begin your idea of designing your idea. What's your contribution to this space going to be? We have seen a pandemic bump with podcasts. So TV and streaming is way up. Radio listening has dipped a bit, but it has generally held sort of steady, but podcasts have increased. There's some figures there from Ofcom in the UK, from the US as well. We've seen the similar sort of trends here in Australia, that podcast listening has gone up this year. It's good for complex information. So not surprisingly, there's been a huge number of coronavirus podcasts. Here in Australia, the daily Coronacast is a must listen. And it's been a friendly voice for a lot of people during times of isolation and lockdown. So I think what we need to look for next year is it a bump or is it a sustained rise? And also with a lot of people pivoting to podcasts, is it going to become an overcrowded market? So I'll have some tips later in this webinar on how you might navigate that. Okay, so kit and software. So any microphone is better than no microphone. That's the first thing I want to say. The microphone that I'm speaking to you right now on is a smartphone microphone. And this here is a broadcast quality mic. So it's better than nothing. If you've got nothing, use your headset. I want to see if I can switch over to my, let's just do, yep, there we go. So I just wanted to play you an example. This is a very well-known chef in Australia, Maggie Beer. And she's been doing sessions from her kitchen all through this year. Not possible to go into a normal television studio. I just want to play you a few seconds of this so you can hear what happens if you don't have a microphone.
The easiest thing I could think of doing that's going to taste so beautiful, and that is just making a raspberry frappe.
So for whatever reason, these broadcasts from Maggie haven't been using a microphone. Let's contrast that with the Irish 101 podcast. And this is made by another mobile journalist, Len Clark, who works at Notre Dame University in the United States. And one of the things he does, because he's a former radio hack and he's just fantastic, you'll hear his voice, is he does a show, regular show about the Notre Dame Football Club, the Irish 101. And this is the sound that he gets just using his phone.
Irish 101 is powered by Indiana Dunes Tourism. For information about Indiana's National Park, visit indianadunes.com.
So, and of course, there are other national parks other than Indiana. I just always feel that I have to say that as a former public broadcaster. Okay, so let's see if we can get back into the... I love it when it works. So just the contrast between those two pieces of content gives you an idea that any microphone is better than no microphone. What are your microphone options? Well, there is in fact a microphone on your smartphone, which is good enough for broadcast. You'll often see at press conferences, there'll be someone holding their phone up, capturing the audio. Most smartphone microphones are at the bottom of the phone. You can always Google your phone and find out the specs, where are the various microphones on your phone. To get better sound from your smartphone, just pop a windshield over it. And if you don't have a windshield, you can just use a child's sock. Will give you the same result. What that does is it reduces wind noise, including any wind noise from your mouth as you're speaking into it. If you want to use an external microphone, there are lots and lots of options. So as I've mentioned, your smartphone headset, you could buy a Pro clip mic, like the one on the top right there, or a USB, sort of a USB jack desk microphone, or a full setup with, sort of a microphone stand and a wind sock in front of it and a mixer. All of those things are options for you. In terms of which brands, I would say it depends, but I think my overarching advice is try to go for a reliable brand if you can. When it comes to microphones, get the best one that you can afford. So there are some brands there. They are obviously not an exhaustive list, but they all do make microphones that are good enough for podcasting. I think don't go down the rabbit hole of, is it a podcast microphone? Microphones, sort of relatively interchangeable. As long as it's capturing good quality sound, it doesn't matter if it's got podcast in the label or not. Professional tip, you might buy a nice microphone, but your guest might just be using a headset. So something that some podcasters do is they will courier a microphone to the guest so that both the presenter and the guest are using exactly the same microphone. And then afterwards, the guest returns it. It's a bit like, Love Film or something where you used to order a CD or a DVD and then you would return it back through the post. Do you have to? No. But it's just a little tip that I've seen some podcasters do, and so it's worth knowing. Whatever microphone you use it properly. So around about 5 inches from your mouth, a good little tip in the graphic down the bottom is either 2 fists back to back, and that will give you roughly about the right distance, or you could put your thumb on the bottom of your lip and then stretch your little finger out, and around about there is where you would hold your microphone. And then you can adjust it. So some people have a soft voice, and that means just move the microphone a little bit closer, not too close, otherwise you'll get that sound, and louder voices a bit further away, but not too far away so that you don't pick up too much room noise, too much echo from the room. Always do a test recording. So have a listen, and then if needs be, just move that microphone a little bit further away or a bit closer. So how do we record some audio? Well, on a smartphone, you can use an app called Voice Record Pro. It's free. It's available for iOS and Android. It allows you to use a slider to control what's called the volume, or the level of the audio going into the machine, and also the format. So you can adjust to record in WAV, which is super high quality, or in MP3. I will just mention now that when you do your recordings, record them in WAV, because that way you have a lossless, high quality audio file. And then when you finish your recording, make a WAV version, that's your master, and then also an MP3 copy, and that's what you would put up as your podcast. The iOS version of Voice Record Pro has a transcription within the app, which is kind of cool. There are other ones that you can choose from. So Voice Memo, Rec Forge is one that's quite good for Androids as well. But basically any good voice recording app will do the job. For audio recording on a desktop, a free option is Audacity. So Audacity is both a recording and editing software program. It's been around for years. There are lots of online tutorials and guides, and all you need to do is plug an external microphone into your desktop. Just make sure that the cable that comes with the microphone will plug into your laptop. So it might be a USB mic, for example. And then you're good to go. You'll see in this graphic down here, there's a little red button. That's your record button. Alternatives include Adobe Audition, which is not cheap. GarageBand is another one, Hindenburg, etc. There are a lot of really good basic programs and high-end programs, but I would recommend starting with Audacity. If you've never done it before, just give it a go, see if you like it. Okay, so remote audio recording, which I know quite a lot of you guys here want to know about today. So in your mobile version of Skype, you can select a recording just by tapping on the little 3 dots at the bottom when you've got someone on the call, and then selecting Start Recording. Both people will see a copy of that call in the chat after the call finishes. You can't download it on the phone, but what you do is you go to your laptop or desktop, find it in the chat, and then just right click on it. It will save as an MP4. That's a video file. But if you drop an MP4 into Audacity, it will save off as an audio file, and it will do it for free. And then, of course, you can edit it in Audacity as well. You can, of course, record in Zoom. And both Zoom and Skype have this slightly tinny sound to them, but it's not awful. Some of the podcasts that we did for Mojo Asia earlier this year used Zoom, and it's acceptable. On the desktop, you can choose between local, as in saving to your desktop, or in the cloud. On a smartphone, that graphic just on the bottom right-hand side there gives you the option when you're on a Zoom call to record to the cloud. That's the only option you've got. When you go to your Zoom account, you can download both the video and just an audio version. So you have that option there. And again, just record it, drop it into the audio editing software. You can also do this in Zoom, in Teams, and also in Google Meet. Okay, so what about high quality options? A great option, and it's used by a lot of broadcasters, including the BBC, is Clean Feed. It only works on Chrome and Firefox. It gives you a high quality audio file. The setup is super fast. So you just go to Clean Feed, get yourself an account. It will open up a window on the right-hand side that looks like that. You press the little plus. That will generate a link. You send that to the person that you want to talk to. They open it, and it opens up this audio bridge between you guys, and it will record in the cloud, basically, and it'll record a good quality version of both of you. So as long as you're both using a decent quality mic, it'll sound like you're in the room. The free version will give you a mixed file. There are some sort of technical reasons why it's nicer to have a recording of you and a recording of them and separate so that you can adjust it. That will cost you $22 US a month. And it gives you some other cool bits and bobs as well. So give the free version a go, and then just see if you want to upgrade. Similar kinds of services are available from Zencaster, vMix, and a new one that I've come across recently, which is called Blinder TV. It's a startup from New Zealand, and that will do exactly the same thing but video. And of course you can always pull the audio off a video file. Okay, so now this is a little bit of jargon from my public broadcasting days. Simulrec, simultaneous recording. So what it's doing is recording simultaneously on your phone and your laptop. And the way it works is this: you open up whichever program you want to use to record the call, so Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, etc. And that's your backup. Now, you and your guest both wear headphones, so there's no sound coming out of the laptop speakers. And then you use your smartphone as the second recording device. And this is the recording that you're going to want, because this is going to sound like it's in broadcast quality. So when you finish the call, you ask your guest to send you their audio file. They can do it via a thing that I'm going to show you in a moment called WeTransfer. So they have to get it off the phone and pop it into WeTransfer. And then you put your audio, your smartphone audio and theirs, into an audio editing program. And down the bottom, that's basically what it would look like. And you just edit it in that way. So that's a really great way of getting a high quality recording from somebody. And it's free, right? That's free. Voice Record Pro is free. Audacity is free. If you own a phone, that's the expense, obviously, but everything else you can do for nothing. So receiving audio, if someone wants to send you an audio file, one option is for them to send it to you via WeTransfer. It's best on a laptop. There is an app version, but I've found that the laptop version just is easier to use. It gives you free file transfers of up to 2 gigabytes in size, and you don't have to log in. You just open www.wetransfer.com, put the person's email address in, or they put your email address in, and then they say, here's my audio file, and off it goes. It's super fast. Another way that you can ask people to send you audio is over WhatsApp. So once someone has sent you their audio file in a message, or they've recorded it just by tapping a little microphone in the app at their end, go to your desktop, open up the desktop version of WeTransfer of WhatsApp, right click on it and select download. Now, the audio format that will come onto your computer from WhatsApp will be what's called a .ogg file. It's just another audio file. So .mp3, .wav, .ogg, .aac, lots of them, doesn't matter. Online converter of pretty much of any kind, and there is a link to one in the Google Doc in my tweet at the moment, and that will just convert it straight from OGG to WAV or MP3. Okay, people say, can I fix this sound in post-production? It's better to have good audio on the way in. So try not to record outdoors if it's windy. Indoors, try to turn off anything that's humming or buzzing. So that might be the air conditioner, the fridge. I've turned off fridges before, fans, and record somewhere quiet. I love this picture. This picture is of Ira Glass, who of course is from This American Life. And that's a photograph of him recording the show in his wardrobe. It's a great place, actually, a wardrobe. You can also just put some blanket around the space that you're in, or I've seen people record inside a cardboard box with some soft foam inside it. Anything to just deaden the slight echo that you'll get. In this room where I'm talking to you, it's mostly hard surfaces. And so it's not too echoey, but it's not ideal. A great place to record your own audio, just if you're doing scripting bits, so links and the intro to your show, is in the car. And also rooms with carpet. There's no carpet in here, it's wooden floors. So try to find somewhere that's quiet and ask your guest to do the same. So what audio are you going to need? Well, there's audio that you don't want. And these are the easy ones to get rid of: fridges, sirens, jewelry. So if someone's got, you know, clinky bracelets or perhaps a leather jacket, just ask them to sort of try to reduce the amount of sound. If someone's got a habit of tapping when they're making a point, ask them to stop, because you're going to hear that. If they're too loud, ask them to move the microphone. And if you can hear music playing in the background, if possible, ask that to be turned off. There's two reasons for that. One is it's distracting. Two, if you're using music in the show, it will overlay with it and sound a bit weird. And the third one is if it's really audible, you might get hit with a copyright violation on YouTube if you put your show on YouTube. So if you can hear music in the background, ask people to turn it off. So the audio that you do need is a script. So you might need an introduction, welcome to my show, links between perhaps some interviews that you've done. You might then have some script of you again. You need your interviews. So maybe that's one-to-one, or it might be groups. I was looking up on CleanFeed, and I think on CleanFeed you can either have up to 3 or 4 guests. I was trying to check it today and I couldn't find the exact answer, but you can have more than one, which is great. And then bonus point noise. So that might be some room noise or atmosphere that you record to give a sense of where you are. Location sound. So if I was going to record an environmentalist, for example, let's say if I was allowed to travel, I might go somewhere that's got a natural environment that gives me a sense of background noise. And of course, music. We'll talk about a free source of music in a moment. That that picture there is from Buzzsprout. So Buzzsprout is an audio hosting site, and they have lots of really useful guides for creating podcasts, including templates. So that's a template from that website. Okay, so free music. YouTube has the YouTube Audio Music Library. Yes, it does get overused a bit, but you might find a sound in there that you like. It's copyright free and global use is permitted. And that's terrific, because if you use a commercial track, you'll need to pay for the licensing. There's a special kind of license that you need for podcast music. So for the first show that you do, perhaps something from YouTube is a good go. It also works on all social platforms, which is helpful. And let me just see if I can open it up. Yep, looks like this is a good moment for me to do a time check. Okay, so I'm 28 minutes in. Good. So it looks like this, and you can filter for genre, mood, for example, artist, duration is quite useful, and also the license type. So the license will say whether or not you need to mention the person who owns or composed the music or not. And you can preview it just by pressing the play button. If you think, yep, that's the sound for me, then you just click on download and it will land magically. Oh no, it's probably going to open iTunes, isn't it? Excellent. Okay, why not? Okay, so that's how you access YouTube Audio Music Library. It's a great resource, and again, there's a link to it in the Google Doc that's on my Twitter account at the moment. Okay, hosting sites. Your audio has to live somewhere. So where it lives, basically what happens is you upload your MP3 of your show to a hosting site, and then the hosting site will generate what's called an RSS feed, really simple syndication. And that code is what you will need for your show to show up in iTunes, in Google Play, in Spotify, and so on. A few years ago, that was quite complicated. You had to fiddle around and load it into different spots. But most audio hosting sites these days recognize that what we want to do is make audio programs. We don't want to mess around in the back end of an audio hosting site to try and work it all out. So most audio hosting sites will do this for you automatically. So as long as you have spent a bit of time going, okay, what kind of cover art do I need? And what sort of information do I need to put into my audio hosting site, including any metadata that will make it easier to find, the audio hosting site will do it all for you. Off it goes. So I've mentioned 3 there. They are 3 of a very large number of options. Someone's going to ask me, which one should I use? It depends. I would just recommend taking a look at what each one will charge you for some of the things that you might want. So for example, unlimited storage, access to archived content. So if you're doing a daily podcast, do you really think people are going to come back and go, what was broadcast this time last year? If the answer is, oh, they're not going to come back, then perhaps you don't need a very large archive. But if if you're a, excuse me, if you are working in a program where you really want, a long-standing record, and perhaps to go back and do specials on previous shows and say, well, a year ago we did this and we're doing a follow-up and here's the old show, then you might want to spend some money on a sort of a dedicated audio hosting site with some good features. All sites include great guides with tips and ideas, and I will just leap back over into Safari for a moment to show you. So Buzzsprout, for example, has a whole tab, how to start a podcast. Huge amount of guidance here. Similarly, no, I don't want to subscribe right now. I'm busy. Similarly, Podbean has a support center. So it's help.podbean.com. Honestly, if you get through both of those help sections, you'll be good to go. There's so much great free advice at the moment. So take a bit of time to read some of that. It doesn't mean that you have to then sign up to Podbean or Buzzsprout, but just be aware that those sorts of guidances are available to you. Okie doke. So that's where the audio lives. You may also want a website. You may also want a social platform, etc. You may want to cross-publish your podcast on YouTube, for example. So putting your content on your audio hosting site is simply giving it a home, and then you might want to populate other places with that so that you're getting greater visibility on your product with different audiences. Okay, now you're going to need a thumb-stopping idea as people scroll. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, think audience first. Something I've found when I'm doing podcast training is that people say, I've got a great idea for a podcast. I go, terrific. Have you run that past the audience? And they go, what? And I go, what? And they go, oh. So who is your audience? Who do you want to share a story with? Who shares your passion with this topic? That's really going to help you. And I think in this day and age, when we're trying to monetize what we do and stay solvent, trying to think at the bottom of this list here, I've said dream sponsors and partners. I really think that this should be part of your planning before you even begin to think about, what's your audio hosting site or which microphone are you going to buy, is who might possibly pay something towards the creation of this so that it pays for people's time, it pays for potentially travel if you need to travel next year when we can finally travel again to record content. Who's going to pay for that? What's it going to sound like? So the audio design of your show might include interviews. It might include music. You might also want to do something that's more crafted. So things around soundscapes, for example, which would combine perhaps music and sound effects. I must add it to the Google Drive, actually. Transom, which is transom.org, which is in the United States, has a fantastic range of tutorials if you want to embed yourself in audio storytelling and really get into the craft of it. And get lots of inspiration for how your show might sound different, jump onto Transom. Have a look at who's making something similar and think about how yours might sound different and who are your dream guests. All of these things will help you sort of refine, I've got an idea for a podcast, into something that's a thumb-stopping idea. I want to draw your attention to the image at the bottom left. So in December last year, I spent a week or so in different newsrooms of Reach PLC and Johnson Press, who are two of the biggest regional publishers in the UK. And this was the Edinburgh session. So this was with JPI. And the way that we approached it, and I really would encourage you to do this, is to work with people that perhaps in your newsroom or in your sort of circle, to go around the room, come up with your idea and then refine it. And we would go around the room twice to say, all right, this is the thought that I have. These are the people. And we really took views from everyone across the room, including who might sponsor it and partner on it. And out of that session last year came the podcast Scran. So Scran is I'm advised that Scran is a Scottish word meaning food and drink. And it turned out that Rosalind, who's the lady with the blonde shoulder length hair there, she said, you know what, there's no Scottish podcast on food and drink. There's one that's maybe by Lonely Planet, but there isn't one. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, no one talks about this outside of this room, because that's a killer idea. And the most recent show that they did, which was last week, was talking to the actor, I'm going to mess up his surname, Sam Hogan, the guy out of Outlander, and they've got him on the show talking about whiskey. And to me, that's a thumb-stopping idea, but it was just born in this ideation session. Should you make a podcast? Well, this year of all years is a year of innovation and experimentation. So it's a great time to try something new. And I think particularly with the inroads into TV news and television generally of Zoom calls and Skype calls, I think we've become more comfortable, you know, even in sort of more sophisticated media markets, with sound that sounds like it was recorded in someone's lounge room, because it was. So it's a great time to try something new that might expand your existing audience, attract a new audience. I'm just going to say the word children again. The listeners of tomorrow, the people who will buy your newspaper and subscribe to your website in the future, but also perhaps form the basis of a new brand partnership, might help drive subscriptions. So I think it's a great time to make a podcast, actually. We hear this phrase, fail fast, fail well. And I think we're finally getting over it. Let's not fail fast, fail well. Let's do things strategically. So preparation is key. Do some audience analysis. Try and talk to the people who buy your, your newspaper or who subscribe to your site. Do you want a podcast? Do you want one? Because it's going to take us half a day at minimum, a week. What topics would they like or need? Do some proper competitor analysis. Who is in this space already and what's going to differentiate our show? And then some hard thinking about the resourcing. Do we have enough time? Do we have enough resources? How are we going to pay for this? How will we market this? What platforms will it be on? Can we cross-promote it with existing shows? How are we going to go into this space to make some noise? And that way you won't be the little engine that couldn't, you'll be the little engine that could. Bonus points, identify sponsors before you start. I would like us to see a replacement of the L for the V in 2021. Don't pivot, let's pilot. So a great way to get started is a low risk limited trial. It might be as many as between 4 to 6 episodes, or you might just make one pilot and then perhaps workshop that within your newsroom. Set some clear SMART goals for it. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time limited. What is good going to look like, basically, against each of those SMART goals? And what metrics might we use? That might be, we want to see a specific uptick in subscriptions over the course of the show. It might be feedback from the audience via surveys and social posts that we're getting it right. The Google Podcasts Manager, which is a relatively recent development, will give you some pretty good metrics, actually. I was on a session yesterday, so Google, I think it's g.co/training, will take you to a tutorial on how to use Google Podcasts Manager. And at the end of that, review and reflect. And then you can revise and relaunch. So you can have a soft launch and then a hard launch where you go big. Or you might decide, you know what, hasn't really worked, or we're not resourced for this, or this isn't where we want to go. And then no shame, no fear, no foul, whatever it is, pull the plug and move on to something else. Okay, so next steps. Now what? This is your homework. If you want to do this over the summer, come up with a thumb-stopping idea. Do the competitor analysis to really sharpen that idea up. Go simple is my advice. First off, don't spend a fortune. Simple equipment and simple software. Give it a go. And then if you need to, you can buy something that's posher. Pick a hosting site. Again, it doesn't, there's several. I have to say I've been liking what I'm seeing from Buzzsprout and Podbean. They just seem to be really straightforward, simple things to use. And I did some looking around at which were the best ones for people who are working primarily with mobile. There is one called Anchor, which is great. And Podbean also has a great mobile app. So find one that is going to also work for you guys in terms of how you're primarily going to be making it. So if you're going to be making it on a mobile, then choose one that's got a great mobile production app. Create 1 to 6 episodes as a pilot, and then schedule your reflect, revise, and relaunch. And if you need a hand, my contact details are at the bottom there. Okay, so that's my formal part of this. I will stop my sharing. And I'm here to answer questions.
Hello again. Thank you so much, Corinne. That was brilliant. And we have a lot of questions here. So I'm going to work back.
41 in the chat.
I know, okay. Wow. I'm actually going to work backwards on this. And many of these are incredibly good questions. So this one is from, excuse me if I mispronounce your names. I know we have an audience from all over the world here. This one is from Mutiara. And she says, thank you for the opportunity. I'm planning to make a podcast, which is not like a talk show. So I have to take the sounds of nature. I take it she's recording nature sounds. Regarding equipment, how about recording natural sounds such as air, birds singing? Do we need special equipment?
Okay, so I'll say for the first and last time, almost everything, it depends. Okay, so Mutiara, what I would recommend is I'd like you to, I'm just going to pop a couple of things in the chat because I can. So Anne Jones, Off Track ABC. So Anne Jones is a broadcaster working for the ABC in Australia, and she has been specialising in recording audio of nature for the last couple of years. She's got some great tutorials. One's on Instagram, I think, and she's also, you can find her on YouTube. But do I need special equipment? You need a good microphone and you need a good windshield on it, because if you're outdoors, you're going to get wind noise, right? There are some great microphones around that will record in stereo. So, and, you know, surround sound, for example. So that might be something you want to explore. You know, one of the things that we didn't talk about in this session because we were talking about remote recording, but, you know, something like a Zoom, so these sort of solid state recording devices, Zoom, I think it's, Zoom H4n is it's not the newest one, but it's available cheaper than the newest one, and it's perfectly fine. You'll find them on eBay. A Zoom H4n will have a stereo microphone that comes with it, so give that a go. Maybe I can zip through everyone always asks this, what's a good length of a podcast episode? They always ask that.
You want to answer that one?
It depends. Okay. So the longest podcast episode I've ever come across was a church sermon from somewhere in Mississippi, I think, which was 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The shortest one I've ever come across was a daily poem, which was 2 minutes, which I just thought was adorable. So, you know, a lot of people say if you're in a commuting city, then peg your podcast length to roughly the length of a commute. Somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes is a good length for a podcast.
For someone to listen to in their car on the metro. Well, hopefully in the future, post-pandemic, we'll all be using the metro again in the future. This question comes from, I'm trying to pronounce your name correctly. I think it's Kieran. Do the hosting platforms that were mentioned provide analytics?
Yes, to an extent. Yes. So, and that's generally a paid part of the service. So you can dig into, I mean, it's a tricky one with podcast analytics. People have been agitating for better analytics for a long time. And I think, you know, a couple of things that are not reliable is going to the top of iTunes, for example, because iTunes charts are partly human curated and partly it's to drive the discoverability of new shows as well as to let people know what's popular. But yes, you'll get some pretty good analytics. And I haven't used Google Podcast Manager yet. I can see the wonderful Kim Fox is on this call. Hi, Kim. And she's posted a link to it. So have a look at that because it's relatively new. And I did have half an eye on a webinar on it yesterday and it looked pretty nifty actually. So give it a go.
Brilliant. And we have another question from the same poster. And this is also a very good question because, you know, right now, one of the biggest talks has been about sustainability in journalism. And this poster also asks, how can you monetize your podcast similar to monetizing your video on YouTube?
Okay, so there's a few ways of monetizing a podcast. First, you can put it in front of the paywall to drive subscriptions. Okay, so, and I think to do that in a deliberate and sophisticated way, so perhaps with a brand partnership with an advertiser in the print copy, for example. So you could think about bundled offerings to advertisers, but also to drive subscriptions. There are an increasing number of podcast hosting platforms that will allow for geolocated ad streaming. So one, for example, is Acast. That used to be an invitation-only platform. Actually, you've just reminded me of that. But I understand it's now available to everybody. So that's exciting because that means that you won't get random mattress ads from Wisconsin. You'll get something that's actually for sale in your city. So Acast is one. There's another one, which is an Australian one called Whooshcar. And I'm sure that those are not the only two these days. Cross promotion of your podcast. So you might come to an agreement with another podcast to perhaps bundle your offering to an advertiser. So that's what's called an advertising network. So there's a number of ways of doing it, but I think joining up your monetization strategy is the most important thing. It's not just to have an ad. It's also to think, how is this driving subscriptions? It's also to think, could we join an advertising network? Could we promote what we're doing in the podcast on the Facebook page and then perhaps have a sponsor to work on that? That to me is, I think, the smart way of thinking about this.
Great. And Ken has a question that I've been wondering, and I think many journalists have been wondering. Do you have any recommendations for apps that can record a phone call, not an online video call?
Yeah, it's always a bit messy, this one. So on an Android phone, I believe you can just record on an Android, right? And you know, so I used to, one of the colleagues that I used to work with had two phones for that reason. He had an Android phone so that he could record calls straight onto it. On an iPhone, you do have to go via an external app. But these days, you know, you can just download Skype to your phone, right? And then record the call that way. So I guess I'm asking, is there a specific reason why you wouldn't want to just use Skype? Oh, thanks. Colin in Ireland has said, Android stopped allowing call recording due to GDPR. So perhaps that's just Europe. But interesting. Okay. But I think Skype is a good option. And of course, you can also record a Zoom. So there are apps. There's one called Tape a Call. I don't know. I feel a little conflicted about it because when you use the third-party app to record a phone call, it's living on someone else's server, right? So I guess, I don't know. I don't know that I want to go with some random app. I think I feel a little bit more comfortable using something like Skype or Zoom, where at least I feel like there's a target for me to go and complain to if my audio gets compromised for some reason.
Colin also had a question about audio quality and video quality. He says, I know this is about podcasting, but what is the audio and video recording quality like in Skype? Also, do you know what the bit rate is like? And he said on another point, a Zoom recording quality.
Let me just do that one first.
Okay.
So working backwards, I don't know. But I have to say, I have been super impressed. I'll pop it in the chat. So it's, as I mentioned, there's a New Zealand startup called Blinder TV. They just recently collaborated with stuff.nz to help the journalists cover the election. So what it does is it generates a link. You can send that link to anyone with a smartphone and it will just literally open up in the browser a live connection. And the reason I mention it is that they're going very hard on a really high quality video content as well as high quality audio. So that's I think that's really exciting. And Blinder came out of a desire to create a system where people who are celebrities, particularly like the New Zealand All Blacks, for example, so, you know, rugby players, don't want to give their mobile phone number to a journalist. So it's a blind phone call, but it's evolved into this quite nice interface.
Mm-hmm. And actually a question by Jill, who jumps off of Colin's question. So she said, you mentioned that audio recordings in Zoom and Skype aren't the best. If you have a decent microphone, is it better to set it up where you are to record both you and your guest if they're talking to you via one of those platforms?
Okay, so if they're talking to me via one of those platforms, they by definition, they can't use my microphone. So for example, Stella can't use my microphone right now because she's, where are you?
I'm out in Washington, DC.
She's in Washington, DC, and I'm in Sydney. I would recommend exploring Clean Feed. Okay, so Clean Feed does allow both sides of the call to record as high quality as the microphone, right? So it's picking up whatever's coming from here into that cable, going into the computer and then sitting in Clean Feed. I do like the idea of unmixed audio. You have to pay for that, but the free version will just give you a mixed call. So as long as both of you are around about the same level, that's where it's a problem, right? If one person's much louder than the other, the mixed file will be tricky to fix. But if you're both around about the same level, great. And listen, if you're podcasting regularly, $22 a month for separate recordings that are good quality is probably a good investment. Like, that's an expensive coffee per week in Sydney. I appreciate that that's not a viable option in some economies, but then, you know, you can do a simul-rec, right? And just use a phone.
And this question comes from Rashmi. He asks, could you share some advice on writing a script for a podcast?
Depends on the podcast. If your podcast is about poetry or it's about a sermon, it's going to be very different. Look, I think in terms of the best advice I would give generally, if there's a generic piece of advice I would give, is sound like yourself. Okay, so irrespective of your topic, you need to write how you speak. So that's consistently the, I don't want to say the least attractive, it's just the most distracting thing when you listen to a podcast. If it sounds like someone is reading it, it is going to be boring, even if it is an interesting person, right? And then practice it. So there was a woman I used to work with at the BBC who had arrived to her shift. She was a senior editor there. And she'd come in and she'd say, this place sounds like a church. And she didn't mean it in a good way. She said, what I should hear is dozens of journalists reading their scripts out loud. So that's the sort of generic advice, is to try and write how you speak. And it's great to read your script aloud. You'll then come to a thing and go, you know what, I wouldn't say that. No one would say that, and just make it into conversational language.
So that stresses that practicing and testing things before you record them is a very good idea.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Oh, and the usual, you know, make sure you've got batteries and a power bank, and, you know, don't make the moment that you test anything new, whether it's for a podcast or anything, you know, 5 minutes before you have the interview with the president.
Definitely. This question comes from Mauro. And actually, this is a good question for me too, because in all these webinars, I have no problem admitting this live, I have been reading off a templated script that I set up prior to creating this webinar series. And he asks, related to this question, do you have any advice for introductions? And I take it he means introductions of guests.
Oh, he might not, though. He might mean introductions to the show.
Oh, okay. Mauro, do you mean introductions to the show or introductions of guests? Oh, intros to the show. Okay, there we go.
I'm going to say what I think you shouldn't do.
Okay.
Yep. So one of the things, I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think over the last year or so, there's been an increasing trend towards all introductions sounding the same and a bit, a bit sort of matey or a bit giggly girly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. There's a program I used to work on at the ABC with an Australian broadcaster called Natasha Mitchell, who is doing other things now, but we used to work on a psychology and neuroscience program called All in the Mind. And I still I goosebump whenever I remember Natasha's approach to how did she introduce the show. When we were doing the edit, she would listen for the most intriguing, strong quote, not the most shocking, the most intriguing thing. And she'd put that at the front. Sometimes we would have almost a minute of voices from the program without either of us speaking, and a music bed and so on. So I would say try and make it sound different, right? That being said, I think also a conversational tone. You don't need to, you don't need to sort of have too much banter, I think. To me, that's sounding a little bit like an overused trope. So try and find a fresh way of doing it. And then Mauro, when you do your podcast, please send me a DM on Twitter and I'd love to have a listen.
And there's another question from Rashmi here on the list. He asks, now we talked about the distance where you should have your mouth in terms of a microphone. But he says, well, for example, when we're using headphones, now I kind of have a flexible headset here. Now you're using a regular, I think those are Apple headphones, correct?
Yes,
and
other headphones are available.
Yeah, and he kind of asks, should we be adjusting distance on headsets like this, for example, or like yours? Yours, you can't you don't really have a way to adjust distance between the mouthpiece and you.
Yes, I do.
Oh, there you go. And should journalists be doing that?
It's a really interesting question. I was looking at some of the entries for the WANIFRA Digital Media Awards for South Asia just recently, because I helped judge those. And there was a fascinating documentary done by not a group of journalists, by one person who was visiting a hospital where there was, really serious, COVID patient overload. And it was, an incredibly brave piece of reporting. And what she'd done was attached a clip microphone, like one of the ones that I'd shown you, to, it was a very long one. It had a nice long cable. And she'd attached that to a selfie stick. And she was using that to interview people.
Oh, yep. Wow.
Yeah, it was just very, I thought it was very innovative because it's, that's a cheap way of doing it. And, India is so, blessed with very affordable smartphone equipment shops. Just amazing quality of equipment for a low price. Anyway, so yes, you can adjust this. I've also seen, in fact, I taught a course once where it was impossible for people to shop online. It was a group of people who were in Libya. And so we taught the whole, that was a mobile journalism course, but the same applies for podcasting, where people just popped it here like that. It's about the same distance. Is that answering the question? I hope that's answering the question.
I think it is. And I think we're just about at time for this webinar. So sorry we couldn't get to every single person's questions. We welcome you to definitely keep in touch with Corinne. Before we head out, could you tell us a bit about the digital skills agencies and if any of these reporters want to get in touch with you in the future, maybe want to consult with you about a podcast they're setting up and what you're able to offer them?
Sure. Okay, so I've just popped my email in the chat. I've just made sure that I've spelt it correctly. So yeah, so the digital skills agency is primarily me. Occasionally I subcontract to, trainers and consultants elsewhere in the world, especially if someone asks, oh, could we have training in X language? I only speak English. And I do think I think it's really important to, especially in audio and video, you want to work with someone who can listen and give you feedback on not just the sound, but also the content. So I work on contract to newsrooms directly, to learning providers like Thomson Reuters Foundation and BBC Media Action. I've also done quite a lot of coaching and mentoring because I think, individuals also want a hand. And so I do just a, basic hourly rate type arrangement, which means that people can then just maximize the amount of time. So the amount of learning they can get just in a couple of hours rather than having to sit through a whole, a day or so. So yeah. I just try to be really straightforward and down the line and say, what is it that you need? And then match a solution to that. So drop me a line on email and my Twitter DMs are open.
Thank you so much, Corinne. And thank you so much to all our attendees for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
I really appreciated this masterclass. It was actually really helpful for me as well because I know very little about podcasting. So I learned a lot today. And
I'm so glad.
Definitely. And I just want to let everyone know that next week we're bringing you a special training on managing a newsroom during the pandemic with AJ Plus's supervising executive producer, John Lawrence. So stay tuned for that. It will be on our newsletter and we will be posting it to the forum group. I wish everyone safe and happy holidays that's upcoming. And we'll see you all next time. And thank you again, Corinne. We really appreciated that. And a recording will be available on the ICFJ YouTube channel if you would like to rewatch it.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thanks so much everyone who was on the call for giving up an hour of your time today. It's been lovely being with you.
Thank you. And have a good night in Australia.
Thanks. And a great day in Washington.
Bye-bye.